Chapter 5, Part 3, Your Emotional Brain. Emotional injury. Do I have like a thing? No, I don't. When we say we've had emotional wounds and scars in life, this description is more accurate than we know. When we say I've been burned before, we really mean it. That's because when we go through upsetting or traumatizing experiences, we can experience physical injuries in the emotional centers of the brain from the intense heat generated, whether we're showing our emotions on the outside or not. These brain wounds can then influence how we think, feel, and behave. Scorched brain tissue. For example, when we're lying in bed, fixated on something hurtful someone said, or some misjustice that occurred that was out of your control, or a hurt you experience from betrayal in a relationship and the hurt feels impossible to resolve. So it takes over your mind and dominates your thoughts. The electrical patterns in your brain don't just swirl around your entire brain and circulate. Part of your brain's electrical patterns can actually lose circulation because the hurt that occurred has become such a singular focus that it has driven and pinpointed electricity into the specific area of the emotional center of your brain, where the thought of that experience began to root itself and fester. It can feel impossible to keep your mind distracted with other thoughts in this situation. To simply change your brain's electrical patterns back to normal circulation, because the emotional injury that occurred was so shocking and so hurtful that most of the electrical pattern of your brain is now dedicated to one thought pattern, in one direction, to one area, creating an obsession. That hurtful experience can become an obsessive cycle that can relay over and over and over again in your mind. A categorization occurs from the intense heat generated in one area. It may take a week for someone to be able to shift the brain pattern. Even if they try to get out of bed, take a walk, go for a run if they're physically capable, or keep themselves busy by being productive, the electrical pattern will keep shifting to that same wounded area, meaning the person will keep thinking about the betrayal or other form of emotional injury as they keep playing it back, trying to figure out how, where, or why it all went wrong to try to fix or resolve it. It becomes a battle of changing the brain's electrical grid, and that's hard to do. Say the emotional injury had to do with a relationship. For the next few days, you try to go about your life. You get up, take a shower, try to get something to eat, yet everything you do that you shared with the other person becomes a reminder of the hurt. So the electrical pattern in your brain keeps heading into the direction of the hurt brain tissue. It becomes a fight and a struggle to heal emotionally. How serious the betrayal or other injury was, how many brain betrayers, such as toxic heavy metals, were present to fan the flame, how prepared your brain was with supplies to physically withstand the heat generated, and how many supplies you're continuing to give your brain to support it through healing. All of these determine the size of the wound that's left over, what recovery looks like, and how fast healing can occur. When we're emotionally healing, we have to remember this. We have to remember that physical tissue of the brain could have been injured, calloused, categorized by intensity of the electrical patterns driving into a specific area of an emotional center of our brain, and that the brain tissue is in great need of healing. Brain tissue is meant to be saturated with glycogen, stored glucose, meant to stay supple and soft, meant to have a form of elasticity and bounce back sponginess. Brain tissue is not supposed to be hard. It's more difficult for electricity to run through hardened brain tissue and hit the intended neurons. Brain tissue hardens when it gets scorched and cauterized from overheating of an emotional injury. Overheated brain electricity forms calluses and scar tissue in the brain tissue that cause specific areas of brain tissue to lose their spongy bounce back quality. Neurons can even get trapped in this hardened, calloused brain tissue. Hardening of brain tissue is most likely to occur when the brain tissue is filled with toxins and poisons, including toxic heavy metals, petrochemicals, fragrances, MSG, and caffeine, and is constantly being overheated from emotional injury and high fats in the bloodstream. Toxic substances saturating the brain without electricity even hitting them lessen the elastic, supple nature of the brain tissue. Plus, when the brain's electrical grid hits them, the everyday toxins and poisons in our brain can elevate brain heat, especially when glucose or glycogen is lacking to protect brain tissue. Electricity transforms toxins, making them more damaging to the brain tissue. This means these toxins and poisons can create the beginning stages of some hardening brain tissue, although it won't be in the form of calloused tissue until an emotional injury occurs. When an intense emotional experience elevates the heat of the specific electrical pathway in the brain, now we have the perfect storm. That overheated pathway pinpoints electrical heat to the specific area of the brain, and if toxins and poisons are in that same specific area, there's a higher likelihood of hardening, of brain tissue getting cauterized and calloused and scarred, with the possibility of trapping neurons. It's worth giving toxic heavy metals special attention when it comes to emotional injury. As you discovered in Chapter 3, Your Alloy Brain, toxic heavy metals play a major role in brain heat and electrical patterns. Because metal conducts electricity and heat, when toxic heavy metals are present in the brain tissue, your brain can heat up even more, which heightens the physical injury that can occur in brain tissue. This means we need to be that much more patient and proactive with the healing process, bringing back what the brain physically needs by following the healing guidance in part 5 of this book, Bringing Back Your Brain. And if desired, bringing in additional support from this book's companion, Brain Saver Protocols, Cleanses, and Recipes. Soul protection. I have smoothie on my face. There can also be a soul aspect to emotional events. When something terrible happens, your soul, which normally resides in your brain, gets projected out of your body to protect you from a certain amount of soul injury. Some people can feel this out-of-body experience watching themselves from afar or even above. This is a safety mechanism. This way, your soul doesn't have to experience the full amount of pain from betrayal or loss. You may have heard of the supernatural occurrence of Mike the headless chicken. Mike was a chicken in the 1940s who survived long after his head was cut off. There are a lot of theories out there about how this happened. After hearing this story at the time, hundreds of farmers worldwide started chopping their chickens' heads off in experimental ways. It became an obsession, chopping the heads off in various places because people were in such disbelief. Farmers would sever their heads higher up, preserving even more of a chicken's neck and brainstem that Mike's trying to see if chickens would live too. Over 100,000 chickens were beheaded in this process, and they never survived. Here's what no one knows about how Mike stayed alive, and why it's relevant here. A chicken has a soul, which normally resides in its brain just like ours. At the traumatic time of having its head chopped off, the chicken's soul left the chicken's brain. Instead of floating away into the ether as the chicken's body died, the chicken's soul entered into the chicken's body, giving the physical body's will extra strength to survive. Along with intelligence the soul had gathered from the chicken's brain, That is, Mike stayed alive because by entering his body, his soul gave strength of will and brain intelligence to his body. I didn't actually know that story. I haven't heard that one. Roller coaster relationships. When emotional injuries are repeated, an area of the brain can basically get electrocuted by intense electrical stimulation. Relationships are a powerful example of how this happens. As we've covered, when someone goes through a breakup, a tremendous amount of heat is generated in emotional centers of the brain. What if the couple gets back together, the relationship is mended, things get better, and then a breakup occurs again? Neurons in the same emotional centers of the brain that were just starting to mend will get shocked again. It's like an electrical shock treatment to that central nervous system tissue. If a relationship continues on this roller coaster of making up followed by turmoil again, emotional wounds will keep hitting in the same emotional centers. During the most traumatic moments on that roller coaster, the soul is outside of the body, watching and waiting for things to subside so it can come back. When a pattern like this develops, neurotransmitter hormones in the emotional centers of the brain start to gather information that another shock could be coming. This can make a person hypersensitive, even allergic to the coming of the next breakup, fight, or cheat, causing additional emotional responses and additional emotional pain. That allergic response varies in severity depending on how much the brain is lacking in its nutritional needs and what the soul and physical brain both remember from past trust issues and other breakups, fights, and cheats. These old wounds are a big part of how allergic you get in the present. Because again, when we talk about emotional wounds, we're talking about physical wounds to the brain tissue. These old wounds can physically tear open again and become fresh with a new emotional injury. This isn't someone being overly emotional. This is a person experiencing a physical brain response to repeated emotional and physical brain injury. Injured neurons in the emotional centers of the brain are receiving messages from neurotransmitter hormones, chemicals, as they try to send forewarning in hopes of stopping the situation. That's when a person learns their tolerance. An allergic reaction escalates and peaks to a point where you feel if you don't change your course, in that moment, some serious damage is going to occur or something's going to go terribly wrong. You're at your limit. You become so allergic that you feel if you stay in the game, you're going to get hurt past the point of no return. When this happens, someone may leave the relationship for good, if they even have that option, before too much damage has been done in the emotional centers of the brain by calloused and cauterized, and I hope I'm saying that right, cauterized tissue, and before too much soul injury has occurred. Emotional strokes. When you're lacking the brain supplies you need, it's easy to experience a stroke. If our brain environment isn't up to speed, we're more vulnerable. People who are most eligible for a stroke have elevated low-grade viral infections combined with an imbalance of nutrients, food, and hydration, combined with toxic heavy metals and chemical poisons in the brain, combined with emotional shock or stress. We're not just talking about a classic stroke, the kind in which blood flow to part of the brain is interrupted in a readily diagnosable way. This combination of factors could also set somebody up for an emotional stroke that can't be diagnosed, where physical injury that's undetectable by any MRI or brain scan occurs inside an emotional center of the brain. With an emotional stroke, a doctor will see no sign of physical stroke presence in the brain, even though it is a physical brain occurrence. So they may classify your emotional stroke symptoms as an anxiety disorder or virtually any type of mental disorder, depending on the doctor and your symptoms. What are the symptoms of having suffered an emotional stroke? Examples include the inability to think clearly, panic attacks when someone is talking to you, feeling numb throughout your body, fear of communicating with anyone, inability to make decisions, losing sense of time, obsessing that something is wrong that you can't pinpoint, fear of starting anything new, fear of leaving the house, an allergic reaction to stressful situations, where something inside makes you feel you can't handle the stress. Some people can have the mildest of emotional strokes, and some people can have more severe ones. You could be allergic to stress for a short time and then get past it because your brain is naturally healing. You're bouncing back. There's a resilience because you're getting what you need, or you already have what you need inside your brain. On the other hand, you may not bounce back so easily. Your symptoms could be pronounced or prolonged. Your allergy to any kind of stressful situation could stay around because the emotional injury was more severe, and or your brain is in greater need of the supplies to protect itself and heal. I'm having a liver rescue by a medical medium. What's going on in the brain with an emotional stroke? Tiny blood vessels in the emotional center of the brain get temporarily damaged. Brain tissue that bore the brunt of the brain's electrical heat from the betrayal, hardship, loss, or other trauma can also become calloused, making neurons oversensitized. Don't let this be the cause for despair. When you give your brain what it needs, it can come back. Adrenalized emotions. Adrenaline heightens everything going on in the brain electrically. When we get emotionally challenged on any level, whether good or bad, whether in a brand new relationship with a partner, a new boss, or in a friendship with a coworker, whether with the excitement of going on vacation or taking time off and doing something we love, whether deciding to go skiing one day or riding a motorcycle, anything we do, adrenaline plays a role. Adrenaline fuel on the fire. When we have a good experience, adrenaline is released from the adrenal glands. When the adrenaline touches electricity, it's flammable. Healthy adrenaline helps fuel the electrical grid. It's undiscovered by medical research and science that adrenaline is filled with receptor compounds. These receptor compounds are designed for the electrical grid in the brain. When the compounds hit the electricity of the brain, they light up and ignite like fireflies or like bugs hitting a bug zapper. Adrenaline is a necessity in small, healthy amounts. We require it in all our everyday living and functioning. Adrenaline behaves differently from oxygen. While adrenaline burns like oxygen inside the body, it does so with a more rapid, aggressive, intense heat. Adrenaline's fire doesn't squelch easily with water and glucose, although water or hydration and glucose are still critical to address the brain heat from adrenaline. Imagine you're experiencing something good, skiing down a slope, your adrenals pumping because you're about to hit a tricky little spot that everyone forewarned you about, where if you don't handle it right, you'll wipe out. For the excitement of the challenge alone, it's worth it to you to go down the slope. Euphoria and clarity come when adrenaline is hitting the electrical grid during a good experience. It puts you in the feeling of being in the zone. As your adrenals start filling your blood with adrenaline, all that adrenaline, that gasoline, reaches your brain and ignites an electrical grid. It's more adrenaline and a more intense blend of adrenaline than the gentle, mild levels of adrenaline hitting your electrical grid when you're showering, brushing your teeth, or going to the bathroom. What about an unhappy moment? A bad experience? What about betrayal? What about getting a message from your best friend that reveals she doesn't understand you after all these years? Everything you've poured out to this friend, all your vulnerabilities, weaknesses, and soul secrets, it's as if she never heard any of it, and she delivers a blow you never thought possible. The adrenals release their chemicals in an intense adrenaline blend geared to power you through the moment of betrayal, rushes to your brain, hits the electrical grid, and catches fire. The reason you get this adrenaline fire is to provide clarity, faster thinking, and the strength to override any mental blocks or smaller injuries already in the brain. So you can be quick on your feet during this challenging emotional experience. The adrenaline fire is there to help set you on a new path, power you to a safer land and new experiences. This adrenaline fire is also why, when somebody goes through an emotional experience, they can feel so drained and worn out afterwards that it's difficult to function for months. When the adrenaline subsides from the electrical grid, feelings of sadness, depression, or brain exhaustion can elevate. It's why bouncing back can take so long, and why some don't ever bounce back. If the brain is up against acidity, deficiencies, poisons, and toxins, it's all the harder to recover from the intense adrenaline surge of an emotional blow. This much more. The bounce back ability of youth. When someone is young and goes through a hard time, elders will often say, "Get back on the horse and try again." Or, "Don't worry, somebody else is coming." Or, it's okay you didn't get into that school. You'll go to a better one." Or, "It's okay you didn't get asked to prom. Better luck next year." We do tend to bounce back better when we're younger, because we tend to have fewer toxins in the brain and because the adrenal glands aren't fully developed. So they only release a limited amount of adrenaline for emotional experiences. This doesn't mean you can't feel big emotions or be hurt emotionally when we're younger. Your brain electricity is still active and adrenaline is still being released. So you still feel and hurt. A teenager's first love going wrong, for example, can be devastating. Here's what's key. Adrenaline won't fuel the fire and increase brain heat to the extent it does in adults. That's because children and adolescents have the control mechanism of underdeveloped adrenal glands. Underdeveloped adrenal release less adrenaline and than fully developed adrenals do. Let me read that over. Underdeveloped adrenals release less adrenaline than fully developed adrenals do. And that protects a younger person's brain. It shields it from getting too hot because a younger person's brain is not fully developed yet. Even though emotions can be heightened in young people, and children often take things harder in the moment than adults, less adrenaline leading to less brain heat also means they can often bounce back more easily. This limited release of adrenaline also helps keep addictions from occurring in children. You can still get an emotional wound early in life that you'll have to carry into adulthood, and that can surface later. These wounds, These wounds normally start to show themselves around age 30 or after, by which point the adult brain is fully developed. It's why so many unknowingly fear their 30th birthday. When your brain develops fully, you start soul searching and wounds start to surface. And yet, when you're younger, your adrenals won't flood your bloodstream the way they do for an adult. When you're still young, this protective measure gives you a dust yourself off, start again ability. It gives you the power to recover fast, allowing your brain to enter a mode of, I'll look back at this and not even care about that one night mom or dad didn't want me to go out to that party. It takes a lot more adrenaline to power a fully developed brain and body, especially a brain and body that have accumulated decades of everyday toxins and other brain betrayers. Given that we often see big emotional reactions in young people, this may still seem unexpected. In truth, for a child who's upset and reacts emotionally to a situation, adrenaline fire in the brain doesn't even touch the levels inside an adult who's staying outwardly calm and not reacting on the surface. When we see kids show extreme emotional reactions, it's often because of higher levels of toxic heavy metals in the brain and blood sugar crashes from insulin resistance. As we get older, when we're lacking very important chemicals that are diminishing in our brain as we age, including glucose and glycogen storage banks, our brains are becoming thick with toxins, toxic heavy metals, and fat because we don't know how to combat any of this. We can't recover the way we need to recover. Not only do we often have more problems as we get older, we have more adrenaline to scorch the brain than when we were younger and could still recoup easily. As adults, our adrenal glands are fully developed. We no longer have to have the protective control mechanism of underdeveloped adrenals. When adrenaline releases, floods the body, enters the brain, and ignites the electrical grid, it causes an intense heat to burn. I'm going to do one more. Toxin-clouded emotions. Everyday toxins and poisons inside the brain are a large part of the brain's limitations we experience, including emotional limitations. If an area of the brain is clouded with an abundant level of poisons and toxins, ranging from toxic heavy metals to solvents to plastics to other petrochemicals to pharmaceuticals to air fresheners, fragrances, scented candles, and beyond, that area of the brain that's clouded with brain betrayers can almost go into a sleep mode. This doesn't mean we'll be sleeping. It means an area of our brain is not functioning optimally. So we'll rely more on other parts of our brain that are less clouded and clogged up with toxins. It also means we'll be limited in brain functions. When emotional centers of the brain become filled up and clouded with toxins and poisons, we become more reliant on other parts of our brain. As a result, we can become limited in our emotional understanding of others. We can become limited in getting in touch with our own emotional state. We can become limited in feeling and expressing emotions, limited in harnessing emotions. Toxins and poisons clogging the emotional centers of our brain can also mean that we become extremely emotional without understanding why. Dreams can become very intense, extremely emotionally challenging, where constant dream after dream after dream evokes emotions because the body is trying to heal the emotional center of the brain. We do a lot of emotional healing through our dreams. People who have more toxins in the emotional centers of the brain tend to dream about drowning, being in water, playing in water, or being trapped in water, whether ocean, pool, lake, or river, because their emotional state is, in a way, underwater with toxins. They can also have dreams of running from people, not being able to get away when someone trying to kill or harm them. While these dreams can have other meanings, many times they can occur because of toxins in the emotional center of the brain. All right, and we'll stop there.